Hello and welcome. Continuing my series of videos of traditional Christmas classical music. And I'm now going to focus on CDs and LPs of carol music and traditional early music associated with Christmas. As I mentioned in my other video on Messiah, I grew up singing in church choirs, and I have to say that for all of us, our favourite service of the year were the Christmas services, because we got to sing all this glorious carol music. Now, many places adopted the form of the lessons and carols, and this was a form created by the choir of King's College, Cambridge. I'll come back to that a little later in this video. But basically the service consisted of readings from the scriptures, telling the story of the Nativity, and then we would sing a range of carols, both old and new, interspersed with these lessons to tell the whole story. And so for me, Christmas isn't Christmas without listening to records of this kind of music. The two choirs you have to mention right at the top of this, because they are really the keepers of the flame of traditional Christmas music, are the choir of King's College, Cambridge and St. John's College, Cambridge. Now, the way these choirs work is that the choirs are drawn exclusively from the university and from the choir school. The choir school is an institution teaching boys up until the age of 13, and those who are in the school who have a good singing voice are then taken into the choir. There are usually between 12 and 16 boy trebles in the choir. And then the rest of the voices are performed by undergraduates, graduate students. It's a very particular English kind of sound. And we associate probably most specifically with the choir of King's College, Cambridge. And this is a lovely record. I mean, you are going to find numerous records, CDs of King's College performing carols. What's interesting about this one, which is a reissue on the mid-price EMI label HMV Greensleeve, is this is fewer of the sort of what we consider the old chestnuts, the warhorse carols. This focuses more on stuff that's not so well known. We've got music by William Byrd, Thomas Louis de Victoria, that's from the 16th century, Thomas Weelkes, Orlando Gibbons. And then we've also got some more modern arrangements of pieces like The Holly and the Ivy, arranged by Benjamin Britten. So this is a lovely record that you can find dirt cheap, where it's slightly less mainstream carols. Now on this record, we have the rival institution, St. John's College, Cambridge, performing many of the more traditional carols. We've got things like Ding Dong Merrily on High, 12 Days of Christmas, Good King Wenceslas, The Holly and the Ivy, God Rest You Merry Gentlemen, I Saw Three Ships, and these are in many of the very traditional arrangements which anyone in the music business who performs at Christmas will know very well from the Carols for Choirs books. These were the books of carols put out by David Wilcox, who was the choir master at King's College, Cambridge for years, and John Rutter. These are all the traditional arrangements. Now, the sound of King's College and John's College is different, and it's different for a number of reasons. First of all, I think one of the main reasons is because of the acoustics of the two different churches. King's sings in a huge chapel, huge reverberation, which is notoriously difficult to record in, whereas John's, it's a smaller church, a less resonant acoustic, so you are more close up with the choir in the John's recordings. The other thing is that the John's trebles sing with vibrato, and certainly in these older recordings with George Guest, their musical director, it's a somewhat more muscular, direct approach to the music. It's a very different sound. I like both of them, but if you pushed me to choose between them, I think I would choose the John's College recordings, partly because they're better recordings, I think. Well, most of them come out on Argo, which is a sub-label of Decca, and it's a less resonant acoustic. So there's a directness in their recordings, which I really appreciate. Now you can really hear the difference between these two choirs in the next two records I'm going to show you. These are both records which feature the music of Benjamin Britten, and in particular his fantastic piece for Christmas called The Ceremony of Carols. Now, here is the recording by King's College with David Wilcox directing. David Wilcox, the most legendary choir director of King's, worked there for years. I actually had the wonderful experience as a 13-year-old. I just started my new school, and my school, King's and Winchester, were sister foundations. They'd all been founded by King Henry VI. And so every 2 years we would do a combined evensong, all three choirs together in one of these three locations we would rotate. On this particular occasion, it was within King's College, and it was the last term that Wilcox was directing, and so it was a very special experience. Now, the piece that I'm talking about, The Ceremony of Carols, is written for just boys' voices and for harp. And it begins with a procession in by the boys, and then it's settings of various medieval texts. This is an absolutely glorious piece. This is a lovely recording with Ossian Ellis, a legendary harpist, who I had the great fortune to hear in concert with Peter Pears, who was the inspiration for many of Britten's works for tenor. This is a lovely recording, but so is the Johns recording. It's a very different sound. I love both these recordings, and I wouldn't be without either of them. If you pushed me, maybe I would go for the King's one. There's a really nice CD issue of this, which contains some other recordings of Britten's music by the King's College Choir. Britten was one of the greatest setter of words in the history of music, in my opinion, certainly in the English language. And The Ceremony of Carols, if you don't know it, is an absolutely glorious work, and you should check out either of these two recordings. Changing tack for the moment towards instrumental orchestral music, I'm going to show you a couple of recordings of the so-called Christmas concertos. These were a group of concertos associated with Christmas by Baroque composers. Now, here's a record which some of you might be into, some of you might not. This is a recording by Herbert von Karajan and the Berlin Philharmonic of these concerti. And we've got concertos by Corelli, Manfredini, Torelli, Locatelli, this beautiful shiny silver cover. Look, these are not performances informed by period instrument practice or any of that, but they're still very musical performances, and I enjoy them. However, if you want to go for the more authentic, in inverted commas, period instrument approach, you've got some nice choices, and here are two of them. You've got this collection by the Academy of Ancient Music with Christopher Hogwood, and again we've got Corelli, A Christmas Pastorella by Werner, Christmas Suite by Gossec. Then we've got some very unusual stuff, the Sonata Natalis by Wojciech Vanowski, who composed in the 17th century, as well as some Bach. So this is an eclectic collection, not just of the standard Christmas concertos. It's beautifully played and recorded, highly recommended. And on CD, I'm going to recommend this lovely collection by an Italian group, Il Giardino Armonico. And here you have the more standard fare. We've got the Corelli, Vivaldi, Torelli concertos, and then we've got something by Pez and Antonacci. It's a great collection of performances and recordings. I love this group. They were one of the first of the Italian period instrument groups to really make an impression in the rest of Europe and in America. So I highly recommend this. Now, one of the figures who was very prominent in the period instrument movement in England, along with Christopher Hogwood, Trevor Pinnock, John Eliot Gardner, was Roger Norrington. And he made waves by concentrating more on music of the classical period and romantic period. He did recordings where for the first time we were hearing Beethoven, Mozart, Berlioz, even Brahms and Wagner performed on period instruments. He then went on to conduct with other orchestras using modern instruments but using period instrument practice. Now, I have mixed feelings about many of these recordings. I'm not sure there's much justification for playing Wagner and Brahms without vibrato. He's a controversial figure. But here is a record that he did early in his career for Argo. This is Christmas music of an earlier period than we necessarily normally think of. We've got Schütz, a Christmas anthem by Purcell, Behold, I Bring You Glad Tidings. We've got music by Hammerschmidt, and then by the Gabrielis, Monteverdi, Pretorius, etc. And this is music which sounds tremendous at Christmas. We've got the choir, we've got the wind ensemble and the Philip Jones brass ensemble. And it's a splendid sound and not obvious Christmas music, but the kind of music that is starting to be recorded more and more by various groups. But this is a pioneering recording on Argo, that excellent Decca engineering, highly recommended. Now here's a record I stumbled across. It's very unusual. I came across it in the used record bins at Amoeba Music. And this is a recording on CBS, Sony, of The Christmas Story by the Waverly Concert, which I believe is an American group. This is telling the Christmas story all through music of the medieval period. Some of it anonymous, some of it by composers like Dufay. And what this does is it goes through the main stages of the nativity story. We start with the prologue, procession of the prophets. We go through to the nativity, the journey of the Magi, Herod's court, the adoration, slaying of the innocents, and epilogue. What this record does is to reproduce in musical terms something of what one might have experienced during the medieval period in a church. The church always had an awareness of the best ways to convey its message was not just through dry text, but was through beautiful music and through drama. And the idea of the church as being almost a dramatic space is what is explored in this record. The idea that you take the congregation through the story of Christ in a space with the music. This is absolutely fascinating, beautifully performed, all period instruments, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. And actually, unusually for a CBS record, the pressing's pretty good, the sound is pretty good. So this is one off the beaten path, and I do highly recommend it. Sticking with medieval music, here's a disc that I cannot recommend highly enough by a group I absolutely love, Martin Best Ensemble. They recorded for Nimbus Records, and I've actually got a few of their vinyl releases, which were beautifully pressed at 45 and sound glorious. This is their album of Christmas medieval music, and it's just lovely. Like the Waverly Consort, it's all performed on these really extraordinary period instruments, glorious singing. I cannot recommend this highly enough. Sticking again with earlier incarnations of Christmas music, this by the Tallis Scholars is a wonderful collection of Christmas carols and motets. And we have in here included the glorious Coventry Carol, Lule, Lulav Our Little Tiny Child, and various settings of carols, Ave Maria, German CAROLS. The Tallis Scholars emerged from Oxford around the time that I was actually studying music there, and they quickly became the preeminent group performing and recording Renaissance music and sometimes earlier. Their recordings of, for example, all the great masses by like Palestrina, Victoria, etc., etc., these are classics. Peter Phillips worked very hard to create what he called the perfect blend. When I was working in National Public Radio, I recorded a number of their concerts and got to interview him, and it was definitely a highlight of all the different concerts that I recorded. A wonderful group, and again, this is earlier vocal music than perhaps you're used to, but I definitely recommend exploring it. Moving forward in time, we come to a composer whose name has become synonymous with Christmas. I mentioned him earlier in connection with telling you about the Carols for Choirs books. These are the Bibles of any choir putting on a Christmas service, edited by David Wilcox and this man, John Rutter. This is an absolutely glorious CD of his music performed by the excellent Polyphony and Stephen Layton. John Rutter writes in an unabashed, old-fashioned melodic style. These are glorious melodies and harmonies and epitomize the essence of Christmas. All his music is so accessible, and this is a lovely connection. He himself had a long association with his own choir at Cambridge and Clare's, but these performances by Polyphony are altogether the equal of Rutter's own performances. Highly recommended. So we're going to finish where we started with the great college choirs of Oxford and Cambridge. And I'm going to mention here the choir of New College, Oxford, which, under the guidance of Edward Higginbottom, who was their director of music for many decades, including when I was at Oxford, they became one of the very best choirs along with Christ Church, King's and St. John's. And this is a lovely disc that he put out of carols. It's got all the usual suspects plus a few unusual ones, and it's a different sound again from King's and John's. It's a very pure, slightly harder treble sound, but it sounds glorious. It's perfect for this kind of music. Highly recommended on the CRD label. And in conclusion, back to King's and this superb collection on CD. Now here you have all the very traditional Christmas carols, and with the descant arrangements by David Wilcox, which we all know and love. So What the descants are is in certain verses of the hymn, famous hymns like O Come All Ye Faithful, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, he wrote an extra high descant line for the boy trebles. And I can tell you, to sing these things was glorious. Now, subsequent directors of music at King's have written their own descant arrangements, people like Philip Ledger. They're very good, but they're not like the David Wilcox. The David Wilcox descants are just classics in their own right. And if you were to buy just one King's College CD, this is the one I would recommend. This is put out on their own label, and it celebrates the Festival of Lessons and Carols. And what is wonderful about this is it includes recordings throughout the history of this service. You know, the service itself began in around 1918, I think, and it was partly done to mark the sacrifice of all those students who had died in the First World War, and also to celebrate the community of King's College, all the people who came to the church, the people who worshipped there, the people who performed there. And then in 1928, it was taken up by the BBC, and to this day, it is an absolute mainstay of the BBC broadcasting service. It's broadcast on television, it's broadcast on radio, and they put out this CD which combines these historic recordings going through all the different eras of different music directors of King's, and then an extra CD of a range of carols. Now, one of the great traditions that has arisen out of the Festival of Lessons and Carols is the practice of every year commissioning a new carol by a contemporary composer. Many of these carols have gone on to be classics in their own rights, and I'm going to mention in particular Illuminare Jerusalem by Judith Weir, and also The Lamb by John Tavener. These are amongst the carols you're going to hear in this set, and it's a glorious set, and it really gives you a sense of the history of the occasion and also just the richness of the tradition of the carol service at King's. In conclusion, a bonus disc. I'm just putting this at the end because this is a disc which I adore. I put it on every year. If I had to keep just one Christmas disc, this would probably be it. But unfortunately, it's not a disc that's easy to find. You might find it on eBay, but good luck. This was a sampler put out by the Hyperion label, extracts from their extensive catalogue of all different Christmas music through the ages. And you've got a wonderfully eclectic range of music here. We've got going back as far as Renaissance period. We've got stuff from the Baroque period. We've got Mendelssohn, Berlioz, coming all the way up to John Tavener. And it's a range of forces. It's sometimes for choirs, it's sometimes for orchestra, sometimes choir and orchestra. It's a range of textures and wonderful booklet notes, which give you all the background to the music. And actually, as a result of listening to this, I have bought many of the CDs which it draws its extracts from. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have enjoyed putting together all these recommendations. This is glorious music. There's a reason why it has persisted over the years. I hope I've given you something to think about, music from medieval period through to modern music, new carols commissioned by kings. It's a wonderful legacy of music, and even if you're not Christian or a devout observer, there's something in this music which I think transcends its religious origins. It expresses some ideas that are very fundamental to who we are as people and how we want to relate to each other in the best possible way, how we want our society to be. I think that transcends religion, it transcends dogma, and finds its richest expression in this kind of music. I absolutely love it. I love performing it. I love listening to it, as do so many. Anyway, with that, many thanks for watching. Happy listening. Give me a like, subscribe, comments are always welcome. Until next time, good night.
Rejoice for joy, Jesus the Son of Most High, He is risen as angels cry, from King is coming King, with glorious song divine and great, the grace His body gladly had, with solid mark of love and free, and open bar.
The